Greetings, Kerbonauts! This is Kerbal Space Program. I'm Bob Fitch, and this is episode number 16 of Project Ares, an alternate reality universe where things are unfolding differently for both Kerbin and a real solar system Earth. At the end of the last episode, I had started launching this new satellite. It's on its way to the 5th planet in this solar system that we're calling Tellumo. This is just a test flight. We wanted to see what was going to go wrong with it. So for starters, this engine effect looks terrible. Look at all those gaps in there. Also notice it seems to be wiggling. Look at the top there. It's kind of wiggling all around inside that interstage. It makes it very difficult to maintain control right here. Notice on the nav ball we're kind of rolling all over the place there. I also had to keep throttling down because I was going too fast, and so I think back in the VAB we're going to lower the thrust on those engines so that it isn't quite as high and I won't need to throttle it down while we're lifting off. So anyway, as I was saying, this isn't exactly a real flight. You can think of it like a simulation, whatever. I'm not even lined up correctly in order to go to Tellumo. We'll have to wait several weeks before we're in the right position to make that launch, so I have no choice but for this to be some sort of a test or simulation. So let's see what else is going to go wrong with this. We already have the engine effects that need to be fixed. We want to lower the thrust. We want to fix that wiggle. The lower stage decouples okay. I'm not sure where the video went for it. I had it, but now I can't seem to find it. I had the decoupling of the upper stage. It showed that I needed some RCS. For some reason that had been missing on the second stage. We also needed some action groups to properly enable the RCS. There was some problem where all the RCS was in one action group instead of split up so that I could activate them stage by stage. When I go to decouple the fairing, it accidentally is also decoupling the payload, which is not ideal. We still need that third stage in order to do the exit burn when it finally comes time to go to Tellumo. Decoupling the payload from that third stage was way too forceful. It ejected it at high speed, and I want to slow that down. Earlier I had said I want to fix the engine effects for the lower stage. Well, it turned out I needed to fix them for the upper stage too, and that's when I decided to just check all of the engine effects all together at the same time. So that's what we're going to do now. This is the user interface for the ScoreScene mod. The radio buttons all down the side show the different effects that you can modify. If one is missing, that means it's not set up to work with ScoreScene and you have to create a config for it. This is the point when I notice that one of mine is missing, so I will have to create a config, then restart KSP in order to edit it later. You edit the engine effects by selecting whichever one you want to work on first, which brings up another dialog box that allows you to select manual inputs, and then you can throttle it from low power to high power, whatever you want to see, as well as sliding an atmosphere bar to show what it would look like in low atmosphere or high atmosphere. And by that I mean the pressure of the atmosphere, from vacuum all the way up to sea level. I usually start off by looking at the flare because that's something that's typically very small and down near the nozzle. It's easy to get that one in the right position and the right size first. Then I work on the plumes. I go through them one by one, selecting manual input, sliding it to maximum power, and then if it's a sea level engine, looking at it both at sea level pressure as well as close to a vacuum, though typically not completely in a vacuum because most of the time you're not when you decouple those lower stage engines. For everything else, I usually only look at vacuum because most of the time that's where you're going to be with all of your upper stage and of course your orbital engines. The things I usually need to fix are the local position, the fixed scale, the energy, and the speed. Energy indicates how long it's going to live. The bigger the number, the longer it lasts, and the longer the plume or the smoke that whatever it is would be coming out of the backside. If it's a very small number, it only goes a little ways and then just evaporates into nothing. Speed is what you would think. It's how fast it's going to move out of the back. Usually, like in the case of that lower stage engine, when there's a big gap in between the little flares, you have to reduce the speed, which brings them closer together and makes a more consistent looking flame. But if you're going to do that, that shortens the whole thing, so then you might need to increase the energy. That is how I fixed that lower stage engine. I doubled the energy and halved the speed. Anyway, I go through all of the engines one by one, all the effects, the plumes, the flares. I add the config file for the missing engine, I reload and I do it all again. And one by one make sure that all the engines are going to look pretty good when we're using them. I also went back into the VAB and made all those changes we had talked about earlier with fixing the RCS and adding more and fixing the wiggle and adding some batteries. I didn't even mention that, but I found out there was an issue with not enough battery power on the satellite, so I added some more batteries right there. I fixed all the decoupling speeds. I checked a few other things, such as after finding out that KW rocketry interstage that I have up near the top was actually acting as a separator, separating both the top and the bottom and leaving the interstage just sort of floating. And I didn't want that, so I switched it over to being just a decoupler to keep that interstage connected to the second stage. So now with all the engine effects fixed and all the other little bits fixed, the RCS and the stick coupling and the added configs and everything ready, I do one more test before we warp ahead to the point where we could actually leave Gale to head over to Tellumo, seeing as we're still several weeks behind the launch window to the other planet. This flight goes quite well, although I'm not going to show it all because you're going to get to see it when we do the real launch. Suffice it to say, I did all of the staging and the activating of things like solar panels and instruments, got ourselves into a low orbit, and then did an escape orbit. All of it was great, and so now it's time for the real launch. We start off by warping time ahead to where we can reach our launch window. You can see that our planet is right here, and the planet where we're going is this one right over here. Now imagine if the orbit of my planet here around the sun were a planet itself. And our position in the orbit, imagine if that were our position on the surface. Then pretend the place where we're going is really just a moon that orbits around us. Well, the rule that I use there is that when that moon is rising, that's when it's time to launch. Well, the same rule would apply here. So what you're seeing is that I'm warping until we reach that point where if this had been a planet, and if we had been at this position on the surface of the planet, we stop when our target is coming up over the effective horizon of that imaginary surface. Once we do that, we go to the actual surface of our planet and we warp time just a few more hours to get it so that we're on the backside away from the target where we're going to go. And that's when I know that I want to launch. So I do the launch, I record the whole thing, everything goes exactly as planned all the way up until orbit, and then I got distracted, and when I focused my attention back on the game, we had gone a little bit too far past our apoapsis. I thought maybe I could recover it, but we also were trying to burn down toward the planet a little bit in order to make sure we get our proper escape trajectory. So things did not go so well, and we had to launch again. This was the next day from the Kerbals' point of view. They launched the second version that they have on backup. The early part of the flight is exactly like yesterday. Everything went just fine. This time we did not get distracted when we made it to orbit, so we were able to set up our maneuver node that would take us over to Tellumo. We burn at the appropriate time until the engines completely drain away all of that remaining fuel in that stage, and then we go to decouple it, and we find that we have another problem. In an earlier flight, when we had found out that the KW rocketry decouplers were acting as omni-decouplers, and I switched them back to being non-omni, single-direction decouplers, I didn't notice that the module was using the wrong node, not a node that we had anything connected to, in order to act as the decoupling point. This means that the interstage does not properly fall away, and essentially we have an irreversible staging issue. The final stage of this rocket is going nowhere. But the third time's the charm, right? At this point, I have gone back in, modified the config file, changed that KW interstage so that it has the proper decoupling node, reloaded KSP, and here we are trying again. This is the project being worked on by Team Wonder. You see, there are 3 science teams right now, all working in parallel. Each team is working on a different project. Each team has its own name, and Team Wonder is all about exploration and discovery. While we're here, we might as well do some investigation. And so checking out a potential intelligent signal from this solar system, of course, falls to them. The second team is Team Liberty. They are responsible for finding a way back home, and then ultimately finding a way to reconnect us with Earth in real solar system. The third group is Team Pilgrim. They are responsible for ensuring the continuation of the Kerbal race here in this dimension in the event that things don't go as planned, and we're forced to stay here longer than expected, or worse yet, if there is no way back home. So the flight has been going well so far. This is the same point we're coming up on where we had the decoupler failure in the last attempt, but this time around it decouples properly. Unfortunately, the recording of the video stopped. I still had audio, but I had this static screen of this right here, just for maybe 5 or 10 minutes worth of just staring at this, even though I could still hear. So since you can't see this, I will show you a dramatic recreation of the event, but is not actually the decoupling point and deployment of that satellite. I wanted you to see it though. I thought it looked pretty cool. A lot of people ask me all the time when I'm doing stuff like this, what mods are you using? And the answer is, what mods am I not using? I have so many different mods installed, so many different parts coming out of all of those and going onto these rockets. I just have a big pile of parts and I put together the things that look cool, and I don't always know exactly which ones came from where and what and everything. So that's just a really hard question to answer. So getting back to the actual launch, now this is after I had stopped the previous recording and had started recording again. And so that's why I have any footage of this. We had already gone pretty far away from Gale. You saw that we took a look backward at Gale. We also had a close approach with the moon SETI on the way out of the system, so we took a little look at that. Then we left SETI's sphere of influence, then Gale's sphere of influence, and headed off into deeper space. My plan here is to hit the mid-course maneuver point that will bring us closer to Tellumo, bringing us down either over the North Pole or up from the South Pole, whichever way it works out. But then from there, go back to Gale and do another mission and come back and finish this off in the next episode. My reason for that is I'm trying to make it seem like a little bit of time is actually going by, rather than just warping all the way ahead and pretending that nothing happened back on Gale that entire time of the flight. Instead, back on Gale, we're going to look in on Team Pilgrim. Remember, they are supposed to be looking into what would we have to do if we got stuck here, and at the very least, let's look into how we can live more comfortably here for a little bit longer. And to that end, we're going to need to put up some sort of space station module that we can do experimentation with life support systems on. So inside that fairing, we have a cool module from a mod pack called SSTU. But before we look at it, we need to start compiling a list of all the problems in this initial test flight. And you already saw one problem. We need some struts on those SRBs because notice how they wiggled when we were taking off. Also, did you see how fast they burned out? It was about 23 seconds, and those things are most likely heading on their way back down to impact the launch site. That is not ideal. We'd like them to last for maybe a minute and then get dumped over the ocean. Maybe I can just lower the thrust on them, but possibly a thrust curve would work better. Now, I wasn't really trying to launch, so I don't mind that things started heating up quite a bit here, but I'm going to have to be mindful of this when we do the real launch to make sure that this doesn't happen again. Anyway, nothing bad happens though, and we get high enough that we can go to the next test. It isn't until we decouple that we get the next thing for the list of stuff to fix. This is another case of using KW rocketry interstages that still haven't been fixed up. Those are working as omni decouplers instead of regular decouplers, which is why they sort of fell apart there. Also, one of them needs to be disabled so that it doesn't stage. And most likely the same problem is going to happen that happened on the last one, where the node isn't going to be right. So to prevent a problem there, I'm just going to proactively fix that node point. Anyway, the next problem we have to fix is our fairing. It pops away okay as far as the speed, but it breaks apart into bits confetti style, and so I'm going to have to flip that over to being more clamshell style. Now, of course, we get to look at that first module. It's very much like your standard Soviet-style space station core. It has a hub with a bunch of new docking nodes at the top that I will explain later, and it has built-in RCS, solar panels, fuel tanks, and engines. When I go to release the module and decouple the lower stage as a test, that's when we pop into our next problem. The retro rockets are way too strong, and once again another KW fairing interstage is flying away because it acted as an omni decoupler. So another decoupler to fix. After that, the problems I bump into are much harder to see. The action groups aren't set up to open up the solar panels or the communications dish, so I need to do that. When I use the RCS, there are no effects showing up. It's working. I can see the monopropellant going down, but nothing comes out of those RCS jets on the sides there, so I need to fix up that. Something's wrong with the engine. This is originally designed to work with a real solar system, and I'm trying to use it in stock, so I have to change out what sort of engine it has. So instead of using aerosine and nitrogen tetroxide, I wanted to use a liquid fuel and oxidizer, of course. And just like the RCS not having effects coming out, these engines don't have any effects either. When I turn them on, nothing happens, so I need to give them some effects. I'll do a real plume, maybe a little red plume that comes out of the engines when they're on. And here goes the real launch. Look how solid those SRBs are now with the struts holding them on there nice and tight. I also reduced the thrust in them so they last a lot longer. They go to 46 seconds now instead of 23. Maybe that'll take them closer to the ocean, but at least they won't be dropping directly on the base. I didn't set up a curve in them, I just lowered the thrust in the VAB. If I really wanted to do them right, I'd probably have to do the thrust curve like I talked about earlier. Anyway, everything is working much better now with all those little things fixed up. I get asked all the time, what are the mods you're using? And I figured while we launched that, I could use this as an opportunity to show you in the VAB some of the different mods that are currently in use. Kerbal Attachment System, Planetary Base Systems, KW Rocketry, and that's what this booster is right here. It's a KW booster, although I have added a small config to it to give it a thrust curve. I said a moment ago that I was thinking I might do that, and I have gone ahead and done that. It tries to maintain a relatively consistent 6.3 thrust to weight ratio. So it starts at 100% thrust and then drops down over time down to about 18% once the fuel is almost gone. Other mods, we have Modular Rocket System in here, Near Future Technologies, which is using the construction set, the electrical set, and the solar. And then of course we have Squad right here, right? Then we have Umbra Space Industries. We'll be doing a lot of that later. AIES is installed, Baja Construction, Blue Dog Parts, Quaddle Aerospace, which is very good for my satellites, and lots of things came out of that one. And then we have Cryogenic Engines. This is one of the cryogenic engines right here. It is the KS-01 Odin Cryogenic Rocket Engine. I use it on the core stage because once we get a little bit higher, then we can have some really nice vacuum ISP, although it is very good down low as well. As we move our way up, you can see all along the side, we've got more lights everywhere, lots of lights. Those are coming out of Ven's stock, a revamp pack that changes everything, like, for example, this tank right here. This is one of the normal stock tanks, but it has been retextured. Other things we have going on, we have cryogenic tanks, we have CX Aerospace with some space station parts. This is my folder. Right now it doesn't have much in it other than this landing frame and an engine. Then we have Fuel Tanks Plus, which is where this piece right here is coming from. This is a retro decoupler. I'm not using it for the decoupler property right now, if I remember correctly, because we have these interstages on here. Although maybe I am. Yeah, actually, I'm using it as a decoupler. And then these interstages, I think, fall off second. What's nice about these Fuel Tanks Plus ones is they have these retro rockets built right in there. Speaking of which, let's pull all the stuff we've already described off of here, and you can see that I have inside here some batteries, a capacitor just in case we were to run out of electricity. That's essentially my backup battery. And we have a probe core so that this whole thing can act as an avionics ring. These interstages come out of KW Rocketry. If we pull those away, 1, 2, we'll take those off, and we can see under here we have another cryogenic engines rocket, the Tunguska. That is attached to a normal tank from the Venstock revamp, which is then scaled down a little bit using tweak scale with a slightly larger tank up here. That way this one would fit inside that interstage. It has on it my RCS jets down here that come out of the SSTU set. I'll show you that in just a moment. And the monopropellant tanks are around the outside here. All of that can be taken off as a unit. And here we have another Venstock revamp and another avionics ring. Same idea as before. We have our radial computer, batteries, retro rockets, and a capacitor in case we run out of electricity. That's all attached to a KW fairing, which is in turn attached to an extra decoupler. The reason why I use an extra decoupler is I have deactivated the decoupling property of the KW fairing. That way the staging only releases the fairing itself and not the payload. Anyway, other mods we have in here. We have Kerbal Stock Launcher Overhaul, Launchers Pack, although I haven't fixed them up to work with stock yet. Surface Lights, gotta have more lights. Lackluster Labs. The Multi-Purpose Express Pallet System, which is like the things that are on the outside of the real ISS. They have those racks where gear can be stored. We have niche parts, which are all for real solar system, but I'm going to use them for stock. I'll rebalance them and make them work in stock if any of those parts look cool and I want to use them. We have Panzer Labs, which people were asking me, where was that really cool rocket engine that I saw on a satellite recently? And that's what this one is. Panzer Labs is a bunch of satellite parts, and it came with that engine. Planetary Base Incorporated. We have procedural parts, real chutes, SSTU, which I talked about earlier. This is a very cool mod. This is the one where most of the rest of this is coming from. It has this whole core stage here is the SSTU, ST, DOS, TKS. There are many features to this. You can change all kinds of things. I'll just give you one example. Let's take a look at the solar panels. Suppose we extend the panels so that you can take a look at them. I'll do it on an extra copy down here so that I'm not messing up with the original one. So let's say we take this and we extend the solar panels. This is what they look like by default. But then if you modify this, you can change what they look like. Right up here, there's a bunch of little scroll bars. And one of them is solar, and if we modify the solar, we can see as we change it that it keeps changing what the style is. There's all these different types, little ones and long thin ones, different varieties, different sizes and shapes, bigger ones that go way out, ones that go sideways like that. It's pretty cool. You can also modify what the docking nodes are on the tops and bottom. You can change the textures so that if you don't like the texture at the bottom, let's say, you can modify that and go with the black and white, or you can go with the orange, whatever color you want. Lots of configurable things in here. You can change what's inside. Like right now it says it's got Aerazine and NTO, electric charge, material kits, mulch, and supplies. But you can modify the type right here, fuel type custom. You can change it to that, EC, to hypergolic, all kinds of things. It has everything built in. It's got its communications, RCS, solar panels, engines, everything is built into it. So I didn't have to add much to it. I just added my own special docking port with a light on there rotating around, and some extra lights on the side, as well as these special docking things. I will show you how those work once we get into orbit, but those are going to help me reduce my part count quite a bit. And if we keep going down, we're almost at the bottom. We have extra space station parts, and finally, Venstock revamp is right here. So that's going to do it, and let's get back to our flight. And there it is in orbit, waiting for the crew to come up and occupy it. That's where we can start experimenting with Umbra's life support system and get started on doing the whole MKS construction thing, which I've never done before and want to learn about.
Log entry 1542. This morning I tried eating 1 gram of the new plant I discovered last week. The purple one with the red berries. I feel fine so far. I really needed to find something better than the leaves off that yellow tree. The toilet was clogged again today. I just finished fixing it. That was what, the 7th time? Also, just reaching those yellow plants is a pain. Someday I can tell my grandchildren, when I was younger, I had to walk 5 kilometers per day just to eat. Uphill, in an EVA suit, in an alternate dimension. You hear that? An alternate dimension! I still wear the suit when out, just in case there are more dangers like those blood ticks from last month. I tried boosting the communication dish signal strength, but I caused a short. I guess you could call it a failure, but I prefer the term learning experience. Anyway, I'm tired. I'm calling it a day. Computer, turn out the lights. Terminate log entry.
And that's going to do it for this time. Next week, we're going to see the first attempted launch of a new crew vehicle. This can carry 2 Kerbals up to that space station. It's unmanned for this test so that I can see what all the problems are. For example, at the very beginning, we see that the engine effects are not close enough to the engines to make them look realistic, so I'll have to fix the engine effects. And when I get higher up, they are not using the real plumes, so they don't expand out in that really cool way. There's lots of other things that we can look at to see what to fix. Interstage problems, fairing problems, decoupler problems, action groups, lots of things, but we'll see that next time, so until then, I will see you later, Kerbinauts.